Chapter 12. All France awaits the results. The laboratory experiments with chicken cholera had interrupted Louis's attempts to rid French farms of anthrax. Now that he knew how to make chicken cholera vaccine, he decided to use the same idea to fight anthrax. Although he had discovered the chicken cholera vaccine quite by accident, he set out intentionally to produce an anthrax vaccine. Louis called his assistants together. For the anthrax vaccine, he said, "We'll need a weak form of the anthrax germs." Anthrax has no weak form, Louis Thwillier, one of his new assistants, pointed out. "We'll make one," Louis said, "by exposing them to the air and aging them, like we did the chicken cholera bacteria." He soon learned that he could not easily weaken the anthrax germs. Whenever he exposed them to oxygen, they immediately changed into spores. The spores kept their strength, even when set aside for long periods of time. Several months of intense effort passed without success. Louis Thwillier grew discouraged. He said, "The spores resist all attempts to modify them." Louis Pasteur did not give up. He believed that any barrier could be overcome provided he kept trying. He said, "We'll heat them or treat them with chemicals. At what temperature do the bacteria change into spores?" Louis Thwillier searched through their laboratory notebooks. "Once we heat the bacteria beyond 43 degrees Celsius, they change into spores," Louis Thwillier said. He pointed to the page in a laboratory book where they'd recorded the details of this particular experiment. Louis Pasteur nodded. "Yes, 43 degrees Celsius is a high body temperature, about what a sick animal would have just before its death." Louis Pasteur placed a culture of anthrax germs in a heating oven and raised their temperature to 42 degrees Celsius. At that temperature, they stayed alive. They reproduced. They did not form spores. Assistant Thwillier said, "The bacteria are very sensitive to the right temperature. Too cold, and they multiply and stay as strong as ever. Too warm, and they change into the nearly lifeless spores. At exactly the right temperature, the bacteria grow old." "Yes," Louis said, "but will the old bacteria be weak?" He injected sheep with the treated bacteria. The animals ran a slight temperature, but otherwise survived the treatment. It gave them the disease, but did not harm them. The anthrax bacteria had lost their strength, just like the chicken cholera bacteria. His assistants made a remarkable discovery. Assistant Thwillier said, "The controlled heating permanently changes not only the treated bacteria, but future generations as well. A weak parent cell reproduces to give weak daughter cells." "This is wonderful," Louis said. "This means that after we make a culture vaccine, we can simply grow as much of it as we desire." His assistants also noticed another fact. They said, "When we change the weak bacteria into spores by heating them, the spores remain weak, too, and practically harmless." "That is even more wonderful," Louis said. "The ability of spores to withstand difficult conditions now works to our advantage. We can ship a vaccine of the tough little spores anywhere in the world. They will not die during the voyage." On February 28, 1881, at the Academy of Science, Louis described how he made the vaccine. He said, "The anthrax vaccine proved entirely successful in laboratory tests." When Louis Pasteur announced his result, the Society of French Agriculture offered a medal to honor the discovery. However, Louis Pasteur once again found himself engaged in a bitter quarrel. Veterinarians had watched helplessly as anthrax took its toll. They refused to believe a mere chemist could solve a problem that had baffled them for so many years. Rossignol, a famous veterinarian, edited a magazine, The Veterinary Press. Veterinarians and farmers who raised sheep and cattle read the magazine. Rossignol thought Pasteur to be a fraud. He belittled the germ theory. Microbes, the name he called germs, became a matter of ceaseless joking. "Will you have some microbes?" Rossignol wrote in his magazine, "Microbiology is the fashion. It reigns undisputed. It is a doctrine we must not even discuss, especially when the learned Monsieur Pasteur has pronounced the words. I have spoken." Rossignol demanded a large field test to the anthrax vaccine. He urged the Mellon Agricultural Society to set aside 60 sheep for the experiment. He hoped the public test would embarrass Pasteur before the whole world. The discovery, if it were genuine, Rossignol said, should not be confined to the laboratory. The account which these experiments will necessarily cause will have the result of ending all uncertainty. Clearly, he believed Louis would refuse such a test. Louis Pasteur replied, I am delighted to accept the challenge. What succeeded with 14 sheep in the laboratory will succeed just as well with 60 at Melon. So people would know what to expect. Louis wrote out exactly the steps he and his assistants would follow. We will inject 25 sheep with the vaccine. We will give no vaccine to the other 25. Later, we will inject each group of 25 with strong anthrax germs. He would keep the 10 remaining sheep in a pen by themselves. Throughout the test, they would act as a control to the treated sheep. By now, this scientific challenge had begun to attract the attention of newspapers. A reporter questioned Louis. What must be the outcome for our readers to consider the test a success? The reporter asked. Louis promptly replied, the 25 unvaccinated sheep must perish. The 25 vaccinated ones must survive. Scientists seldom spoke so strongly or so confidently. Louis Pasteur left no room for error. Ordinary French citizens didn't need to be scientists or veterinarians to understand the experiment. If the vaccinated sheep lived, then Louis Pasteur would win the contest. They read about it in the newspaper and began taking sides. Would the famous Louis Pasteur be able to prove his case under actual field conditions? Emile Roux and Charles Chamberlain had been away on holiday. When they came back, the details of the test dismayed them. Why did you agree to such an experiment? Emile Roux asked. The vaccine is new and you have left no room if anything unexpected goes wrong. Yes, Charles Chamberlain said. You are risking everything before the world. Suppose the test fails. It will cast doubt on all of the work you have done over the years. Louis Pasteur brushed aside their objections. The test shall not fail, he assured them. On May 5, 1881, Louis arrived at Rossignol's Powley Lefort farm near Melun. Louis brought his 3 assistants, Charles Chamberlain, Emile Roux, and Louis Thwillier. A large crowd of physicians, surgeons, veterinarians, politicians, journalists, farmers, and ordinary citizens crowded into the barnyard. The veterinarians seemed very pleased at having tempted Louis Pasteur out of his laboratory. They believed the public experiment would show his theories to be nonsense. They wanted to be there at what they believed would be his public humiliation. Louis and his assistants entered the shed with a flock of 50 test sheep. They separated the animals into 2 groups. To half of them, Louis would give shots of weakened anthrax. To the other 25, he would do nothing. At the last moment, one of the judges of the test, Monsieur de la Rochette, asked to include cows in the experiment. Louis said, the vaccine for cows is not as far along as those on sheep. The results may not be positive. If you'd rather not, the man broke in. Patiently, Louis said, I'm willing to try the new vaccine on cows too. Very well, Monsieur de la Rochette said. He ordered the farm hands to herd 10 cows into the pen. Another judge wanted to add 2 goats to the test and to replace one of the cows with an ox. Louis agreed to these changes too. The public test began. The 3 assistants injected the culture of weak anthrax spores into the 25 sheep, 1 goat, 5 cows, and 1 ox. For the injections, they used a new invention called a syringe. This device, with its plunger and hollow needle, delivered the right amount of vaccine into the sheep and other livestock. Each of the 25 sheep received 5 drops of the vaccine. They next vaccinated the other animals. Louis told the crowd, my assistants have marked the vaccinated animals on either their horns or ears. The large crowd watched this in fascination. Louis overheard the farmers talking to one another. How can he prevent the disease by giving the animals the very germs that make them sick? One farmer asked his neighbor. After the injections, Louis walked to a large hall of the Powley farm, and there he described the experiment. He used simple, easy-to-understand language. He talked for nearly an hour. He spoke with cool confidence. Many of the farmers who had doubted him came away believing he might succeed. Surely he cannot be mistaken, they said to one another. Louis returned to Paris. For the next few days, Charles Chamberlain and Emile Roux returned each morning to Paoli-Lefort. They examined the vaccinated animals and took their temperature. "We found nothing unusual," they reported. On May 17th, they returned to give the vaccinated animals a booster shot. This second culture contained anthrax germs stronger than the original vaccine, but weaker than the untreated anthrax bacteria. Newspapers carried a day-by-day account of the experiment. The suspense grew. All of France waited for the morning papers to read about the experiment. In 2 weeks, Louis would administer the powerful and deadly anthrax serum to both the vaccinated and unvaccinated animals. "How many will survive?" a reporter asked Louis. Louis expressed complete confidence. "All unvaccinated sheep will die. All vaccinated ones will live." "All?" the reporter asked. "Yes, all," Louis told the man. "The ones I treated must live, or you can tell your readers that the experiment failed." On May 31st, Louis and his assistants came back to the farm. This time, they would inject all animals with a very powerful and deadly strain of the anthrax microbe. On the day of the final test, an even bigger crowd walked to the lot to watch the proceedings. The veterinarians did not trust Louis. They looked for tricks and fraud. Professor Collin, who'd fought Pasteur's ideas all along, told a friend, "You must be aware because the bacteria culture separates into two groups. The bacteria sink to the bottom, leaving the upper part devoid of germs. The lower part is deadly because bacteria fill it. Pasteur will inject his vaccinated sheep with the upper part, and it will do them no harm. He'll inject the others with the lower part, and it will kill them." "What shall we do to prevent this?" his friend asked. His name was Byatt, and he was a veterinarian, too. "You should shake the liquid to mix it thoroughly," Professor Collins said. Byatt agreed. "I shall do as you suggest. Also, I will insist that he alternate the inoculations, first giving the anthrax disease to a vaccinated sheep and then to an unvaccinated one." As Louis and his assistants started to make their final injections, Byatt stepped forward. He held out his hand for the bottle containing the anthrax germ culture. "May I?" Byatt asked. Louis wordlessly handed it to him. Byatt shook the bottle vigorously and gave it back. "Another point, monsieur," Byatt said, "so there is no question that you have injected enough bacteria to cause the disease. Will you give a larger dose than you originally planned?" Louis Pasteur understood the intent of the question. The man implied that Louis might try to trick the judges in some way. Louis remembered his first great discovery, that of the left and right-handed crystals. Scientists had doubted him then, too. Another Byatt, the great Jean-Baptiste Byatt, supervised a duplication of the crystal experiments, watching Louis closely throughout. There was a difference, however. Then, Louis had been a young and untested student at the start of his career. Now, Louis was a seasoned scientist who had proven his honesty upon many occasions. "I will triple the dose," Louis said. "Will that satisfy you?" Since Louis knew that his methods were true and honest, he accepted their proposals. In this way, he disarmed his critics, winning them to his side. The vaccinated animals received a dose of fully active, deadly microbes, and so did the untreated animals. At last, Louis stood up and walked to the judges. "The results will be clear within 48 hours. "Very well," Rossignol said. "I propose that we meet here on June 2nd to view the results." Louis agreed. That night, he told his wife, "Soon we'll know the results. If the success is complete, this will be one of the finest examples of applied science in this century." Louis rode the train back to Paris. There he waited out the results. The next day, Charles Chamberlain and Émile Roux traveled to the farm to check the condition of the sheep and other animals. Of the unvaccinated sheep, several stood alone, their heads drooping. They refused to eat. Quite clearly, they suffered from anthrax. Unfortunately, a few of the vaccinated sheep, which should have remained well, ran a high temperature. Louis acted more confident in public than he actually felt in private. Suddenly, the enormous risk of the experiment dawned upon him in a full and glaring light. Why be so confident? Too many things could go wrong. What if he prepared the vaccine wrong, or stored, or shipped it improperly? What if his assistants had failed to sterilize the syringe needle? Suppose his vaccinated sheep got sick and died from an entirely different disease? If the experiment failed, it would ruin his life's work. "What have I done to myself?" he cried to his wife. "If tomorrow brings bad news, then I'm finished. There'll be nothing for me to do but retire. A whole lifetime of work will go for nothing. It will be the end of all my hopes." That evening, Louis could not eat. He finally went to bed, where he tossed and turned all night. The next morning, after a sleepless night, the doorbell rang. A telegram arrived. Louis Pasteur's hands shook so badly he couldn't open the envelope. Marie tore it open. She read the telegram to him. Of 25 unprotected sheep, 18 are already dead and the others dying. All the vaccinated sheep are on their feet. Stunning success. Rossignol himself sent the telegram. Louis could claim complete victory. Joy reigned in the laboratory and in the Pasteur home. On June 2nd, Louis Pasteur himself returned to the farm. With him were his 3 assistants, who beamed when the crowd broke into applause. The largest crowd ever had gathered. Delegates from agricultural societies, students from medical academies, officials from veterinary schools, and reporters from newspapers. Present, too, were Rossignol and Byatt. "All of the vaccinated sheep are well," Rossignol told Louis. "Most of the unvaccinated sheep are dead, and those still alive will die before the day is out. We did an autopsy on 2 of the dead animals. Anthrax killed them." The veterinarian Byatt, who had been so offensive earlier, rushed forward to shake hands. "Now I, too, believe in the germ theory of disease," Byatt said. Louis asked, "But didn't you once write an article making fun of my proposal?" "True," the veterinarian admitted, "but I am a converted and repentant sinner." "Well," Louis answered, "allow me to remind you of the words of the gospel. Joy shall be in heaven over one sinner that repenteth, more than over 99 just persons which need no repentance." Of all those present, the farmers thanked Louis Pasteur most heartily. No longer would they have to kill their stricken livestock, burn them, or bury them deep when anthrax struck. Instead, they could vaccinate against the disease. Vaccinated cattle could even graze in complete safety on infected pasture land. The public anthrax test meant a public triumph. Louis Pasteur became the most talked about person in Europe. The government of France offered Louis Pasteur the Legion of Honor. Napoleon Bonaparte had founded the Legion of Honor in 1802. It corresponded to knighthood and was the greatest reward that France could bestow upon one of its citizens. Jean-Joseph, Louis's father, had received the Legion of Honor. Now Louis received the same award. Before he accepted the decoration, Louis put forward a condition. "There must be a recognition of my 2 co-workers, Charles Chamberlain and Emile Roux. They're so self-sacrificing. They spend long days in the country vaccinating animals against anthrax." Not only did Louis Pasteur receive the Legion of Honor, but the government gave his co-workers the Cross of Roux. During these months, Louis Pasteur bubbled over with ideas. He still could not believe how fortunate he'd been to discover the principle of vaccination. "What an unexpected success," he would say in wonder. Those jealous of his success had described Louis Pasteur as irritable, intolerant of others, and easily angered. Many people believed these charges to be true. However, as Louis began speaking before various groups, the general public learned the truth. They saw a person of simplicity. He remained humble despite the medals and honors. The government asked him to represent France at an international medical congress in London. The Prince of Wales would bring the meeting to order. The custom of the time demanded that everyone be in place before the prince entered the hall. On August 3rd of 1881, Louis entered the hall. Jean-Baptiste Pasteur, his son, and René Valery Radot, his son-in-law, traveled with him. When they arrived, the attendees packed the hall. Not a single seat remained anywhere except on the stage. Sir James Paget, president of the Congress, waved to Louis. "You are to sit with us on the platform," Sir James told him. As Louis walked to the platform, the people broke into wild applause. Louis turned to his companions and whispered anxiously, "We ought to have come sooner. The applause must be for the arrival of the Prince of Wales." "No, it is you they are cheering," Sir James Paget said. Louis did not realize his own fame. Later that year, Louis Pasteur celebrated his birthday. He was 60 years old. His friends and associates thought he should retire from science. The public test of your anthrax serum is the greatest triumph a scientist is ever likely to achieve. You should think of retiring. I can apply the discovery of vaccination to other diseases, Louis told them. I'm on the right path now. I would feel that I had been stealing if I were to spend a single day without working. Louis Pasteur knew of one more type of disease worthy of attack. He prayed, "May God permit me to discover the vaccine for a disease of humans."